Ladies and gentlemen, we have Dr. Saeed with us to deliver an extension lecture on a very important topic of developing policy research design. Professor Dr. Saeed Shafqat is an eminent social scientist of international repute. He joined Homer Christian College University in 2007 as professor and founding director of the Center of Public Policy and Governance. Besides designing and developing the postgraduate academic program in public policy, he launched the publication of research and news quarterly. In 2018, he was awarded the Tamga Imtiaz in recognition of his services as a distinguished social scientist in the field of education, research, and teaching. In 2020, the ambassador of France in Pakistan, on behalf of the French government, conferred him with the Chevalier des Palmes Académiques for his contribution to the advancement of culture and education. Dr. Shafqat was member of Board of Governors, National School of Public Policy, and regular guest speaker at the National Defense University and National Management College. He has also been the chief instructor at the Civil Service Academy for almost 13 years. He is also the chairperson of SDGs Governance Unit Punjab. Professor Saeed Shafqat obtained master's degree in geography as well as in South Asian Studies, and he has a PhD in political science from University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. He is a founding member and former chairman of the Department of Pakistan Studies established in 1973 at the Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. He was awarded the Best University Teacher by the Higher Education Commission of Pakistan in 2010. Thank you very much, sir.
For a very kind introduction. You should all sit, relax, and think of your questions. In fact, I will raise a few questions. I will try to be very quick and brief. It's not a lecture. It's basically a kind of sharing of what I have been able to do, and then get back to this basic text, whereby I would like all of you to become PhD candidates in doing research. Well, one of the things that I want to really first draw an analytical distinction between three things. Number one, what is teaching? Teaching, training, and preaching. These are analytically three different things. Teaching basically implies that you indulge in some kind of knowledge creation, which is a long, tedious process, not easy. And therefore, whether you want to start at the lowest level, that is the elementary level, or at the highest level. So therefore, one has to sort of really focus around that. Training is basically, sort of involving, can you really impart some skills to those who are likely to undergo some kind of training, whether it's a training for 1 week, 3 days, or a couple of months. Therefore, one has to think in terms of really, can we improve the skills, capacity, ability to deliver what the undergoing training officers or training personnel are likely to go through. So that's something which one has to keep in mind. And much more importantly, all over the world, besides this dimension of improving skills, building capacity, networking is equally important, so that you are able to sort of converse with people belonging to different groups and different kind of ideas and identities. Hence, you have to really think this through. Preaching is much more easier, which means you have to be a believer. Whichever faith or ideology you want to believe in, whether you are a communist, or you are a Muslim, or you are a Christian, or you are a Jew, you have to sort of start with this certain degree of certitude that you believe this is the only right path, and therefore you really do not deviate from that path. And in training and teaching, we start with skepticism. That is, there is no such thing as certitude. There is some degree of skepticism, relativity. You have to seek and find truth. In preaching, you are all the time reminded that the truth is already there. And therefore, abide by those principles of truth and live your life, and that is how one has to really go through and make a case on that basis. As was mentioned, yes, I was at the Civil Services Academy. I've had the opportunity of seeing people from 15th Common to 28th Common. And lo and behold, when I had joined the 15th Common, I had not imagined that I will see some of my undertraining officers eventually becoming sections and running the state, and some of them retiring, and I'm still not retired. So that is again a learned experience that one needs to have. And in the process, I came across some very bright individuals and very smart, and of course some very, very clever, dumb, and all kinds that you can possibly associate with. But I've had a very, I must say, a professionally rewarding experience at the Civil Service Academy. I was able to do things which I wanted to do. Nobody really stopped me whether I wanted to write something. In fact, nobody is interested in reading, so therefore I was lucky. Whenever you write in English, you get published, and nothing really worries me. So I had at least 3 books published when I was at the Civil Services Academy, and therefore one has to sort of really see when people say that there is no liberty. I remind them that if you want to do something, there is plenty of liberty, plenty of scope, and therefore you should really think of the things that way. And of course, I'm a little disappointed that Umar Rasool is not here. He is one of the brightest officers that I can recall. He did his PhD at MIT. In fact, I have been citing one of his articles which he wrote for Yale or Princeton, if I recall correctly, which was on, there was a project called Innovative Governance. So, off the cuff, I can remember 4 officers who have had their PhD, and of course I was one of the attendees. I started with Musharraf Rasool, then Mustafa Piracha, the last Chief Secretary Afsar, and Umar Rasool. So these are people who did PhD, and I have a fairly good idea of what kind of offices sometimes you can have and produce. So one has to sort of really think this through and keep asking oneself. There is tremendous opportunity for you if you want to improve your qualifications. The question that becomes is, what are you going to do with qualifications? And before I get to the presentation, let me also say that given my own reading, understanding, and writing on the Pakistani bureaucracy, sometimes critical, sometimes favorable, sometimes sympathetic, my understanding is that not only understanding, my assessment and evidence that I have collected is that today's civil service of Pakistan is perhaps the most qualified civil service when you begin to look at the degrees from abroad. And therefore, this raises this question that, the degrees from abroad, the training from within, and other opportunities, do they help in improving A, the quality of individuals, B, the delivery of service, and C, the value of public service. Therefore, if these things are not happening, you have to really ask yourself that it's a critical question. The second point that I want to raise, and I want to think you through this, is that in today's time, there was, if I was to again relate it with 20 years earlier, there was 20, 30 years ago, there was some notion of individuals being motivated for public service, for competition. Today, they are also motivated for competition, not necessarily public service. Reason being that there are academies where you undergo preparation for CSS. And if you have invested 2 lakh rupees in preparing yourself, are you going to do some public service? That's a question that keeps sort of bothering me, and therefore I'm raising this for you. Not necessarily that all of you have gone through that, but when I looked at your CVs, not CVs but the badges, it's only 37, 38 or something close to that, which means, maybe you have put in about 15 years of service by now, which is, again, quite a bit. And on this, I am again one of those who is of the view that if we really want to reform or bring about any change in the mindset, orientation, outlook, and want to do some reform within the service, this is the basic age group that we need to focus on. I tried myself, I wrote extensively, I could not succeed. Then I was approached by the UN, the World Bank at times, Asian Development Bank, and I began to sell the same idea to them. Like, look, if you want to really see some degree of change, howsoever bad Pakistani bureaucracy may be, if the system works, it works because it is theirs. And they do not fully comprehend it, we do not fully appreciate it, nevertheless it is there. Therefore, there's a need to really invest in this and see if we can run certain programs. And lo and behold, in 2015, I was approached by my UNFPA, and it so happened that the guy who was running the UNFPA in Pakistan was a Irani. And he was so passionate. He said, I can't understand. Pakistanis are so good, as individuals, blah, blah, blah. But why don't they move? Why there is such a problem? And I want to work on, can you help me understand the civil service? I said, I can. And the basic issue for him was, how do we sensitize individuals, policymakers on population growth and demography? And I worked a program, and it did take off. But as it happens in our case, it starts and remains for a couple of years. Started at NSPP. I was also a member of NSPP too. So it rolled out, has continued, but again, the question is of sustainability. So the point here is that if you do not listen to me, I have other places to make them listen and then deliver what they want to deliver. So having said this, here is this very brief, quick, proposal that I want to suggest to you. One of the things that I also want to point out, the intent is not to make, at least as far as I'm concerned, not to make the civil servants as PhD scholars. They don't have to do research. They have to learn how to utilize research done by others, how to collect evidence, and how to put evidence in some form of policy intervention. That's the kind of concern that one has. So if I were to sort of really give you in short, before I go again to the presentation, as far as I'm concerned, policy research design is a document of intent. It's a document of intent that you want to state, this is the nature of the problem, and this is how I would like to proceed on this problem in terms of addressing and seeking some kind of a formula for resolving the problem. So the issue is policy and its resolution, and therefore you have to sort of really think that through and ask yourself. So if I were to give this same idea to my PhD candidate, I tell them, first think in terms of what is the theme that you have, the topic that you want to have. Number two, define the problem. What is it that you are going to address? Number three, think in terms of a research question. What is it that you want to explore? Number four, look at the literature which is available and the documents and data which is already existing. So if you have these four, then you began to do the fifth part, which is analysis, and on that basis you began to sort of think through and make a case in terms of analyzing and putting it together, and thereby at the end coming up with something to mean a solution. Now, if you have followed me, you can sleep when I show you this, but it would be good if you are awake and then you are able to sort of see what is being said to you. Let me see if I can fiddle it. Okay, now this is again something which I would like you to think through. You are the son-in-law and the daughter-in-laws of government of Pakistan. Okay, because the policy resides with you. The policy resides in executive. That is something which you should ingrain in your minds. Although, you will tell me constantly, sir, no, we do not make policies. Baloney. That's not correct. Somebody can only ask you, we need a policy in this direction. When you're putting up a note, a draft, basic work will have to be done by you. So therefore, when people say that there is no role of bureaucracy in policy making, I tell them, shut up. There is a role if they want to accept and adopt and really pursue that role. If they don't, you may try your best, they will not only budge in it, the question of implementation is much later. So here one is thinking through this, and when I say this, that means for a politician you have an advisory role. It is not necessary that you make the policy, but you have to understand what is it that the elected government or a military dictator really wants you to do, and you are the one who is going to really do it. So keep this in view, that public policy, the all-right influence, it resides in the executive, and the executive is basically bureaucracy, because that is where it is the institutional memory that resides. The notes, the papers that you sort of work on, that is something which you need to keep in view. So, you can have many definitions. Let me start with a few. Whatever government chooses to do or not to do, that means whatever you want to do or not to do, you are the government. Okay? So even a policeman, if I get caught on traffic, if I can convince him that, sir, you are, not only a policeman, you are an inspector, it will be very kind of you if you let me go. I have made a mistake. If he is kind and in a good mood, he has not had a fight with his wife, he will be very generous and let you go. But if he has other issues, all right, you then settle it out. Okay, I am a senior citizen. I know the rule is that I don't have to give you my card. I can give you the card. Give me the $500 rupee or 200,000 rupee, whatever the slip is, and I am ready to get out. So the point I am suggesting is the discretionary power is also there, and it starts right from the very beginning, what I call as street level bureaucrat. So you have to have some understanding of this also. So that is one. A decision or a action of government that addresses problem and not issues. Addresses problems, not issues. So problem has to be solved. Issues can be a predicament. Pakistan is confronted with issues. Policy is more than a decision. It's a larger than a set of sequence of decisions and programs. Decisions and programs. Ask yourself how many and what kind of programs that you do. These are two most important things. A principle that no person or government official can legally perform an act that tends to injure the public. Now, how many times have you done this? Injuring the public. This is a routine every day, and it is equally an important affair that you serve the public. Okay, but there is this moral. So what I'm suggesting to you is that there is a moral dimension to public policy. It is also a judgmental affair, despite the fact that any analyst like me will say that you have to be fair, impartial and objective, yet there is a certain degree of subjectivity, and good and sound judgment is something which is essential. And that is what distinguishes a good public servant from a bad public servant, because then I am entering into value judgment, because that is where you are seeing public good is the key concern. Public policy is associated with the state. It is customarily formulated and implemented by the government in public sector. Lisa Anderson was the dean at the School of International Affairs and Public Policy, Columbia. When I was associated, she came out with a book. The title was, either Fighting the Truth or something to that effect. or pursuit of truth, whereby she was focusing on the American political system and basically saying that, look, as an analyst, as a professor, we have disassociated ourselves from the real power, and we do not challenge the power, and therefore what we need to understand is that it is power around which everything really rotates. So unless you speak truth to the power, you are not likely to succeed. But that's what the ideal professors do, and that is how it was. Okay, now so here I'm going to sort of list for you basically 6 points I wanted to suggest. If you are fully awake, now I would like you to go to sleep and listen if you can, and still remember these 6 points. You can always see the presentation, and I will run it through very quickly. So, define the problem. You see, so one of the key concerns is how do you define the problem? Okay, and here one has to sort of really think that your problem definition should not have a solution. You see, most of the time we start with this phrase that as you all know. Okay, no, that is not the way it is. Or you can also say that I know, the smog is really very disturbing in Lahore, but look at the amount of cars or the number of cars that you have in the streets. Look at the size of grass which is burnt just outside Lahore city. Therefore, the solution is basically in that. So the point one is suggesting to you is that you should really be thinking of making a problem statement in a way that there is some degree of evaluation which one can make, that there are strengths, there are weaknesses, there are good points, there are bad points. And if you are again smarter, you can also use some degree of quantification, and that's why I've used the word, is there a pattern? Which means if I began to look at Lahore for the last 10 years, and I go to the metrology office and say, well, please give me the data for only the month of December from 2010 to 2020, and they may have it. Therefore, you have a quantitative stuff, and you can use the quantitative analysis. Those of you who are very keen, and some of you who are very smart, they can also get into this the analysis, quantitative analysis that the economists like. I want to do regression analysis. I want to do SPSS. So depending on the size and scale of data, you are able to indulge in this kind. So if you're doing it small level intervention, you just want to understand why in Lahore, say in defense there is more smog, and in Bahariya there is less smog. So you are making a comparison of two areas. You look at the population size, depending on how much time you have, how much energy you have, and who is the ACDC or whatever you are in the area. That is how you are likely to look at it. Okay? So quantification where you can, when you state the problem. Problem statement is very important, because see, it is very much like making again a case. Right here, for example, look at COVID. Okay, and there can be more than one ways to put the same question of COVID. Was COVID really originated in China? Was it something which happened because of a bird or a rabbit or whatever? Or is it human, or is it something which is related to lab? We do not know. Nobody has been able to find out yet. But as a consequence of COVID, you began to see the proliferation of medical industry really going all the way for innovating some kind of vaccine. So today we have what we call vaccine nationalism, vaccine competition. Which vaccine is better and how effective it is. So these are the kind of concerns that one begins to sort of really see. So if you are in the business of looking at vaccine, then you are going to say, well, why the Chinese vaccine is not selling as well as Pfizer is. Is it an issue of marketing? Is it an issue of quality? Is it a issue of effectiveness? I don't know. That's why I'm saying that you focus on the problem in defining a way that you are able to evaluate it, and therefore, if need be, you can add some degree of quantification, and hence you have to sort of really see. So the rest is much more important in the sense that basically think that solution is not embedded in the problem and the define. Most of the time, we have the answer to the problem, and when you have the answer to the problem, there is nothing you can investigate. So please think of that and avoid that. Now, there is this whole, if I put it a little more academically, we call it research strategy, research methodology, designing the whole damn thing. Okay? But here it is simple. It is very simple. How are you going to assemble evidence? You see, in most cases, what you do is that in your offices, if you are in secretariat, you have a section officer or an assistant who has been put in that place for 10, 20 years. And if there is a health issue, education issue, data issue, you just ask him or her that, on this please get him, and he will tell us what to do. Or what is the information, what is the latest source of information that is available. So, that's the way one sort of really proceeds. But what I'm suggesting to you is, think before you collect. So there's most of the time as researchers, we are likely to collect information which may have nothing to do with what we intend to do. Nevertheless, that is part of the exercise that, whether I'm doing survey, I have to think in terms of devising surveys. You see, what is the target group? Am I going to talk to the younger people or the older people? Are there similarities in residences or differences? As I said to you, if I have to compare the Bahria town with border town or Bahria town with inner city, you will be surprised how much the inner city of Lahore and its inhabitants have changed. If you have not visited, just visit and find out. And look at some of these commercial markets where you have huge Pashtun presence, and therefore the nature of business is also changing. And now it's no longer a question of what is in Pakistan is manufacturing. What is in Pakistan is getting in the so-called tankers that come move from here to there. You see, so it's this kind of concern that one has. Now, since I'm on it, I raise another issue for you. Look at this concern that given the lawyers' protest and whatever happened from 2007 onwards, why it has become so critical for lawyers to choose only one venue, the Lahore court, the High Court of Lahore, and block the whole goddamn traffic. And we have the same traffic mechanisms. So here, my concern will be, how do I problematize the issue of venue selection? I mean, some of you who work for the government, they would be more than familiar that, here is the AC, the DC, the IG, the DIG, the politician, media person, whosoever has to be considered Maulana. So you know the so-called stakeholders. But how the decision is made and why it is allowed, and there is no effort made to really discourage. Maybe there is some effort made to discourage that the venue should not do this, but someone else. Nothing happens. So one has to really think this through. So think before you collect. The value of evidence is very important, and that is where the self-control becomes. That I do not collect oranges, apples, and bananas. You see, so you have to remember that there is a distinction. That I am working on oranges, I need to know the deepest and the most on the oranges and not on bananas. You see, I'll leave them at some other stage, but not right now. So that's how you not to think in terms of self-control. Literature review is the most difficult part. And that is the most important part that one needs to really see what is it that already exists, has been written, and there is plenty that you will be surprised to see. I was mentioning before PhDs. There is a fifth I remember now. This is Dr. Rana, and I have shared one of his, I think it's one of the best case studies written by anybody. I mean, I think as an academic, I would not be able to write it. S. N. Rana is his name. The study I gave to the CSA last time, it's called To Kill a Mockingbird. If possible, I would like to have a whole session on that. Maybe invite us, Rana, who is currently a professor at LUMS. He is from 18th Roman and decided that he wants to call it quits. He's specialized in agriculture and has done some excellent work on this. But the To Kill a Mockingbird is basically when he was an AC in some district in Sindh, and it is basically related to honor killing and what happens and how one sees this honor killing, abduction of women, how the whole thing is settled, what kind of questions, and then he uses huge degree of literature. And the very title To Kill a Mockingbird is, of course, most of you would know, was a great novel and also a great movie, and therefore it comes to mind. And then he invokes certain religious content also when he says the Last Supper. So that's why I'm just sort of putting it out for you so that you are able to really read. And I'm sure many of you may have seen this, but never thought of writing it down. And that too, he says, after almost 15 years, I'm no longer with the, this event happened when I was the assistant commissioner, and now, I'm a associate professor, and I've gotten the time, and it has taken me more than a year to write the damn thing. So that's how it is. So what I'm suggesting to you is that here is something which is again a kind of unique advantage that you have as civil servants or public servants, because you see every day individuals, situations which are never there in the book and never will be in the book. Therefore, you have to still comprehend and use some degree of knowledge to really do that. So, literature review, best practice, these are kind of things that you start. But much more importantly, if you have to bring about change, what is going to be the so-called theory of change that you want to have? That this is by this kind of method that I will be able to bring about change. Now, for example, I keep reminding others that in this country we need a cultural reform, a cultural policy. It's easier said than done, but why do we need that? We need that whereby we are able to have some understanding of reason, logic, evidence. Reason, logic, evidence, and we are losing sense of it. And since we are losing sense of it, and we want to explain even what has happened to sin, because it was will of God, God bless you, it was not will of God, it was man-made disaster where we took decisions, sometimes deliberately, sometimes without fully comprehending, and yet at the end of the day, we are also showing considerable degree of lack of humaneness, which is more tragic than one can explain and relate. So kindly think of what will be the theory of change that you would like to sort of propose, that given this kind of circumstances, I would like to suggest, or I would like to argue that perhaps in saying next time we need to really look at how we may regulate water around Indus, or what is it that we did with these various irrigation canals? Can we really think through those, or is it a question of basically governance and administration? That we need to really improve upon, empower the local government. When I say empower the local government, that means not only the local government but also the local people. And please remember that many a times folk knowledge is much more stronger than the scientific knowledge that we have. And therefore, there's a need to really merge the two together. It is easier said, but now we keep trying, and particularly after COVID, the global experiment and experience is that those countries where there was great reliance on local government, they were able to deliver better, perform better. In other words, devolution, decentralization is something which works even in communist countries. Therefore, you have to ask yourself, what is the theory of change? So if I were to propose, I do propose, and I have proposed this to the World Bank, that in this country we have, as a consequence of 18th Amendment, we have created the third tier of the government. Nevertheless, nobody. So there is no ownership of the local government at the political, administrative, business level. If there is none, it will never be able to grow unless there is some degree of ownership. We cannot move. So this is again back to the same place. Now is the third part. See, think in terms of constructing the alternatives. You look at the bigger picture first. In other words, that's why I said, look at times you have to collect bananas, oranges, and apples. Okay, but then you have to really start focusing on whether you want to work on bananas or you want to work on oranges. So choose and then narrow down, and that's going to be the kind of model where you're going to locate the problem. If you're interested in health, you're going to point out, is it preventive or curative, which is more important. If you're in favor of preventive, then you have to define your problem in terms of preventive part rather than the curative part. Sorry about that. There's a need to really focus around those and therefore think about those. So you have to really come on that. Simplified alternatives. That if this was not done, what will be the other way I can go about it? You see, so sharper, clearer, focused thinking. It is again easier said, but since we indulge in research, people like me indulge in research, therefore we want to be very clear on our analytical categories, on our conceptual basis. The more clearer you are, the better it is. I mean, if you were to look at 12 federal services, each service has its own charms and also its own failings and sicknesses. Okay, but some have more and others have less. So and it also depends on the nature of change in value in the country. That the values have changed, therefore the value of the services have also changed, and hence you have to have some understanding of that, and therefore move on that. So again, keep designing the problem. Problematization is a key concern. Most of the time, we think of solution first rather than the problem. And as a consequence, we are not able to see. So today, in today's world, complexity has become a way of life. And the intertwining of one problem with another is again very likely. So it's a world where onion becomes the best example. You open one ring and then you begin to see unfolding of other rings, and therefore you have a serious concern and disposition. You have to think in terms of constructing alternatives, and I hope you have it all set for yourself. Select the criteria. You see, criteria selection is tied with again problem definition. Okay, so here again you have to really sort of bounce back on that and see, apply evaluative criteria to judge outcomes, not alternatives. You see, there's a difference between alternatives and outcomes. You see, the outcome is very simple, that if I were to do this is what is likely to happen. Be first of all clear that you have to think in terms of what is your input. That will lead to the output that you are likely to have. And if not, then you think of an alternative, not otherwise. Okay? So that's how you began to see this. So most of the time in the policy design analysis, that is as analysts, and you are mostly practitioners, but sometimes you have to sort of do this because constantly you are reminded that it's efficiency, equity, freedom, which are very, very important, and hence they have to be seen. and they are also perhaps the indicators for how the civil service should work and the delivery of service should happen. But as I've said many times, what happens is that invariably there are societal criteria which you really cannot ignore. As I mentioned, in the case of honor killing, there is a societal dimension to it. And therefore there's a need for thinking about the cultural reform part of it, which is tough and difficult, hence you have to sort of have some understanding. Most of the time, when you look at political feasibility, all the time, whereas the requirement is that we have to go to the IMF because we are not really able to manage our budget right. Therefore, we have to go and the politician is more concerned in terms of what will be the consequences for me as a group, and therefore they would like to be finding ways through which that is acceptable to the ordinary people or has lesser burden. And yet, at times we find that they even ignore the welfare of people because the agency which is outside is too powerful, too persuasive, and you are too dependent or poor or begging, and hence you have little choice except to accept that. So social acceptability, legality, robustness, these are again kind of most of the time as a civil servant, you are constantly reminded that you deal with gray areas. Okay, so when you look at gray areas, then you find out, under these circumstances, what will be the best way that I should really go about, that my conscience is clear, I am also seen as a man of integrity, and I am also seen as fair, just, and equal, which is very, very tough, but that is how it is. That's why I referred to this this case study, To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, this is the kind of challenge that the officer is basically trying to convey to us. That look, as a young officer, this was the kind of problem I was confronted with, and there were too many options, and there were too many pressures, and there were too many powerful people, and yet I had to sort of think in terms of really how can I, be fair, honest, and a person of principle and integrity, and also will my boss support, will be able to carry me along or not when it comes to be concerned that one has. Now, this is the fifth part, which I have already indicated earlier. Fifth part is basically the projection of the outcomes. If I put 2 and 2, will it make 5 or will it make 4? That will be the kind of stuff that you are likely to do. So your model or theory of change plus evidence is something which you are likely to sort of see. And that implies that if you're focusing on education, on health, on disabilities, on security, which is much more easier because you're thinking of the state only. And other factors you do not consider. You are able to identify the enemy, and therefore you say, given this kind of enemy, we think that for defense we are going to need this much. We have to strengthen our air force. We have to have troops on the ground, and therefore you are able to sort of put this in, and the evidence is also very quickly available from the state perspective. Okay, as we saw, for example, in the case of COVID, and when we were able to create under military, not under civilian leadership, the office was of course the planning commission, but it created a body which was able to collect and therefore execute, and in some ways became a successful model. Okay, so here the value of evidence, the value of judgment, the value of coordination, they all band together, and the value of hierarchy. That this is how this country's system works, and hence we should really pursue and follow this. So magnitude estimates. For example, now the West is trying to project that with the opening up of China's COVID policy, 1 million people are going to die. The Chinese say to have with you, it's not going to happen. We have done what we could. We are opening up the lunar year. The Americans may kill somebody or set of individuals in California, but they said, all right, we are ready to celebrate. So this means, there has to be some degree of conflict. But This confidence comes from the trust that people have in their government. And in Pakistan, except God, wherever God or Allah Almighty be, we have no faith in anyone else. All institutions, individuals, and offices have serious disconnect with the ordinary citizen. Therefore, how do you restore trust? And so one of your challenge as the son-in-law and daughter-in-law of the government of Pakistan is how do you restore trust that bureaucracy and state is for people, for citizens, and not against. You see, whereas the perception is the other way around, and hence it's very, very difficult. So that is where I say, you have to bring in the moral and normative dimension, and that's why I keep pointing out that whereas as somebody who wants to work on public policy, my best effort will be to collect evidence, to find data, to be as objective and dispassionate as possible, yet I cannot avoid having a normative dimension in terms of a value which is unfavorable. The policy that I want to pursue and implement is a policy which is for public good, not for personal good. We forget that. You see, so personal good is more important than public good, and that is where the difference is. And that is where the difference is between one country and the other country. One country's leadership and the other country's leadership. You look at the Chinese leadership, leave aside the Communist Party, but look at the leadership and there is a consistency and a certain degree of continuity in the policy formulation. Even you look at India and you're surprised to see that there is a certain degree of continuity, and the leadership, yes, maybe not as corrupt as Pakistan is corrupt, but there is still some faith in the public service, and that is why Indian public service is considered slightly better than our public service. So hence you have to have some understanding about that. Okay, so the normative dimension is there, and of course you can create metrics. You see, the civil servants very much like the tables. You see, if I were to sort of invest in education and the higher education or the lower education, this is the budget I have. How many schools will increase? How many children will benefit? How many others will benefit? So, creating metrics of correlations, not necessarily of 20 factors, but 2-3 factors is always helpful, and that's how you move on. Confront the trade-offs, that's the most difficult part. The difficult part is that any proposition that you come up, any design that you come up, it has some strengths and some weaknesses. And it has some advantages and other disadvantages. So therefore you have to really sort of make a case that, if you are thinking of redistribution of power, how would you go about it? You can think of energy, you can think of, power within the power structure of Pakistan bureaucracy. Then you are really reminded that there are trade-offs. If I were to raise the salary of one group, how will the other group react? So the larger the group that is beneficiary, the higher is the possibility that there will be greater acceptability of what you are proposing. So the trade-offs have to be weighed both, in terms of moral, judgmental dimension, but also in terms of cost benefit. So if you are a really good in terms of really making a case for money for your value, then of course you will put in how many dollars we should, or how many rupees should go here, how many rupees should go there, what will be the outcome, and that's how you're likely to do. So most of the time, the chartered accountants are basically reminding you that cost and benefit is the key, and therefore you need to see cut expenses and increase production and raise the margin profit. I mean, that's how it is. So here, you cut the expenses, but you have to think in terms of a not profit, but what will be for the larger benefit of people. And if you succeed in that, that means you are able to do and deliver better You will be reminded of this young woman in Peshawar or during the flood area who walked in and did things. So it should set an example, whether it was only for the TV or however you want to look at it. But there is some substance that one needs to really look at, and that's where the difference is. If you do not project outcomes, you are unlikely to have any trade-off. So, simplify the comparison and move on. I'm almost there. Decide. This is the most difficult part. Decide. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the decision maker. You see? And invariably, you give it to somebody who is the decision maker. But you are assuming that it's not me who is going to take a decision. So therefore, the general tendency is that as a good provincial secretary or a federal secretary, you keep three options with you. One option that, number one, what is it that the minister likes? Then the second option is what will be for the benefit of people. And the third option is what is good for me. And invariably, there's two options. The third option, which is the second option, it gets sort of swayed away. I'm just simplifying it for your benefit. That, this is how decision making really takes place. The decision maker has to be somebody who has to think in terms of not only his or her good, but the larger public good. And it's easier said in a training situation rather than in a real situation, and hence you have to have some understanding about it. So when you're thinking of the alternatives, you have to ask yourself, well, if my alternative or proposal of reform was so good, why it has not happened? But if you're a good civil servant, before I will come up with any proposal, you will say, sir, we are already doing it. आप अभी बता रहे हैं अभी हम इसके ऊपर पहुंचने वाले हैं तो इसलिए then you have to draw a conclusion of how you have come up with a definition of problem, then you have designed your research proposal, you have looked at various dimensions of it, and now you are ready to bring in all the strings. So if you have identified 6-7 factors, you have to pull them together and say, given all this is the synergy that I can present, and here is my last word, and therefore based on this I would like to sort of end a conclusion and draw your attention to this. I've given you the basic source also, that these are eightfold path. I did not invent them. I simply sort of tried to expand and explain according to my need and my circumstances in the training institution and for my own students at times, but I have found it very useful and I thought I'll share it with you.